Okay, today we're going to be painting these Engines of Redemption, but I'm just going to be showing you one in the video. Once this guy starts spinning, we're going to get right into it. Okay, I've started with a flat black primer. I'm going to use that as the main body of the armor. I'm going to paint the wood here in Rhinox hide, but I'm going to regret it later and change that color, but I'm leaving it in anyway. Lead belcher I'm going to use for all of the metal parts, all these little pistons and hinges, but not going to overdo it because I'm going to come back in with some gold, which is going to really up the contrast that we have in the model. So I'm just being careful, especially on all these little details, so that I don't end up having to come back and fix all this later. And there's a lot of fiddly little metal parts. And this lead belcher is actually the reason I ended up changing the colour of the wood, because I just didn't quite like the feel that it was giving me. There wasn't enough contrast there. Not forgetting to get the metal parts on the arms and all the weapons, especially those flamers. There we go. And then on the back part of the actual soul that's going to be riding in this Engine of Redemption, just getting all those metal parts. We want good coverage here, but because we're going to be using this to go into the model, I actually painted these so that they're interchangeable, but I'm only showing the one here. It's not hugely important that we get absolutely every single tiny detail. We just want to make sure that we get a good idea of what those colours are going to be. So here I am changing the wood colour because I want more contrast, and so I've come in with XV88. It's a slightly brighter colour, and against that black and dark metal background with the lead belcher, gives just a little bit more pop to those panels. Then I'm getting some Retributor armor, and this was a painstaking, very long process, getting all these tiny fiddly little bits of embellishment on the armor, all these little rails and spikes. There's a nice bright gold, and as you can see there, it really comes together and starts to pop. There's a nice contrast between the wood as a sort of mid-tone, the black and the lead belchers are really dark, and the Retributor armor to really make the whole thing zing. The whole thing zing. Good rhyme. Okay, going back in with onto the arms as well. Some of the details on the weapons and the arms in Retributor armor. Nice bright gold. Not forgetting those little details as well. And just being really careful, because we don't want to keep coming back and fixing things. But again, because we kept it as the nice sort of fairly flat black armor, it won't be that much of a problem to fix it if we do make a mistake. And then I'm using some titanium white ink on some of these little tiny details, some of these little buttons and screens that are on the front. But I'm also going to paint the flames at the top in this nice bright white. I'm going to come back and make those look a little bit more burny. And I actually try something a little different on here. Instead of just having plain flat metallic, I don't know what you'd call them, if they're exhausts or vents at the back. Vents is probably the best word. I thought I'd tie these into these flames a little bit, so I painted those white as well. Then I used my Troll Slayer orange and Retributor armor mix, 1-to-1 mix, equal parts, just to change up some of those metallic parts, because I felt like just in the lead belcher they were a bit flat and a little bit monotone. I thought obviously this is the tank for the flamer, so I'll give it a little bit of colour, and this more orangey, coppery, golden colour kind of breaks it up a little bit. Then I'm using Wraithbone onto the parchment for all of these purity seals, which will come back in and give some shape to with some washes and returning the mid-tones. I'll just make sure I get the ones on the front and the one on the side. You can, when you build it, you can put these wherever you want, but this is just where I ended up putting them. So we're at that point now where we want to be really careful where we start to paint things, because we don't want to come back and fix anything. And now we're going back up to those flames, and we're going with the Flash Gits Yellow, nice bright orange. The whole thing covering all the white. We get good coverage and a nice pop in that yellow colour. And then the back of these vents, the whole thing in yellow as well. Make sure that we get down into the crevices. We want to keep the paint fairly thin because we don't want to block up any of those details in the mold. But we also want to get all of it in yellow. We're going to come back and build these colours up. So then I'm using Troll Slayer Orange while the yellow is still wet. And I'm starting at the top and working my way down. Just as you can see there, just wet blending gently. Working from the top to the bottom, stroking backward and forward. Ooh. So we get a nice blend from orange to yellow. And then I'm going to dry brush those flames with the same Troll Slayer Orange. It's a slightly slow process because I'm using a very small brush and being very delicate because I don't want to go in too deep into those dark parts. And there you go. Just building up the orange on just the furthest parts away from the actual burning center of that brazier, I suppose you'd call it. And building up the colour so it looks like a nice flame. Mephiston Red for the actual purity seals themselves. And this comes out really nicely against all those darker, browner tones. So that quite heavily saturated red really shows up. Just being careful. Make sure they get the whole seal. Do try and get the sides as well. And now I'm going back to the flamer. I'm going to give it a really cool effect to make it look like it's been used quite a bit. Give it the metal that burnt out feel. So I'm starting with the gold. Then I'm going to give it a wash of Seraphim Sepia. While that Seraphim Sepia is still wet, I'm coming back with a wash of Druchii Violet. About 2/3 of the way up from the burning end of the flamer. I'm going to mix them up so we get more of a purple feel from about 2/3 of the way to the end. And then I'm getting Drakenhof Nightshade, which is a really good, lovely blue wash. And just the tiny tip at the end, and you get that burnt metal feel. Then Vallejo Pale Flesh for all of the skin on our little tortured soul here. Paying the price for heresy, I'm sure. Don't forget his little feet, or her little feet, should I say. Their little feet. Now very carefully with some Vallejo Black, because I love this because it's very, very matte and easy to control. I'm just going to paint the edges of this brazier so we get a good contrast between the metal chalice that's holding the flame and the flame that's burning. And I'm very carefully going to get the little lines in this vent so we get some good contrast between that deep dark flat black and the bright burning inside, and it gives it that depth. Then I'm using Reikland Flesh Shade for all of the parchment there, and I'm making sure I try and build it up in the under parts of the fold so we get that nice dark shadow. And then I'm going with some Corax White because I want the thickness of that paint, although it's not a great paint, but it is still nice and thick. We're going to paint the trousers, pants, and then what I'm doing here is I'm just going into some of those back details. These colours really aren't that important. You can paint them whatever you want. I just want random wires with different colours just to break up that metal feel. So random wires in red and oranges and gold colours, and make sure I also get the wooden parts back there in a nice dark brown to match the rest of the model. And then I'm going to paint the whole trouser in yellow. We're going to build this back up with some freehand design, and obviously working from light to dark is much easier than working from light to from dark to light. So the whole trouser gets painted in yellow, and then while that dries, I'm just touching up some of these wooden details in Rhinox hide. Where this poor soul's been stapled to this machine. And now with Mechanica Standard Grey, I'm painting the vast majority of the trousers, because that's the actual main colour of the trousers, this grey colour, but some of the details are in yellow. But painting those free-handed yellow details over the grey would be really challenging to keep. We'd have to have 3 or 4 coats to get a nice bright pop. And with these tiny little details, it'd be difficult to keep getting it precisely correct. So we're working backwards for grey pants with this little yellow stripe, just like the box art has, and a little square. And then we're freehanding in the little number in there. And I think this came out really, really well. Really high impact look with not a great deal of work. Then I'm using Drakenhof Nightshade just to give the pants a little bit of shape and colour. And there's a little shine there. Give it that cheap prison polyester feel. There we go, and you can see the other one that I did there. Now I'm using an equal mix of Berserker Bloodshade and Reikland Flesh to wash all of the skin in, and I'm actually going to let this pool because it's got this really nice dark red colour that when it pulls in these little crevices makes those wounds look really fresh and sore. Then Nuln Oil, good old Nuln Oil, good heavy wash on all of the metal parts, brings out some of those details, just wicking it away where it builds up too much so we save the details. As you can see there are the little numbers on the chest. And then the entire actual engine itself. Nuln Oil all over the metal parts. And I actually did this on the gold as well. Normally I would use Reikland Fleshblade on the gold, but I feel like on this model it just worked really well to use Nuln Oil on both of them. Then I'm coming back with the pale flesh onto the flesh areas and just picking out some of the higher areas, bringing back the mid-tone so it doesn't look all washed and shiny. But then now we've got that beautiful pale flesh with the really sore looking wounds with that dark brown, very red wash. It was about 2 parts Berserker Bloodshade to 1 part that Reikland Fleshshade. And then Reikland Fleshshade again onto the wood just to get into some of those crevices, and it gives the wood that varnished feel. Then I'm using some stick-on grass, just some shrubs onto the base just to give it a little bit of variety. There you go, got 2 on there. Then I'm using some PVA glue, spreading it around neatly, just working into all the little areas. I find it easier to add the sand after the shrubs because sometimes the shrubs don't stick to the sand. And there we go. Dip it in the sand, give it a little shake. Clear off the edges. There we go. If we're really lucky, sometimes we can save ourselves painting it. I'm just picking out some highlights on the sheet, on the Purity Seals in some Vallejo pink. And then the secret sauce, and coming back with a dry brush of Necron compound all over the black armor, and this is going to give it a sort of battle damage effect to wear down on that metal, but I'm focusing quite heavily on the feet and the areas that would have had the most impact and contact. So it's quite heavy around the edges of the arms and the feet, and then also on the back of those vents. And then I'm just using a extremely fine marker to freehand in some scripture right there. Just doesn't need to be super precise, just give it a little similar shape. And there we go, all done, and I think looking pretty good. So like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.